Welcome to Pario Magazine, where I chat with people who have a desire to create. Today I'm joined by the voice of Victorian Wrestling, Lord Andy Coyne.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Jamie. Always appreciate the opportunity to hear my own voice, being a commentator and all that, and just basically talk about the Victorian Australian wrestling scene, which obviously I've been hanging around now for quite a few years, I think 7 odd years. So it's certainly one that I enjoy.
Yeah, on that front, obviously the big thing is you're British. How did you come to
Yes.
be in Australia and be the voice of Victorian Wrestling?
Well, as you might know, England has horrible weather. No, but in seriousness, I'm sure we'll get into it later, but I obviously had several years as part of the British wrestling scene. But I actually had taken some time off wrestling when we came over to Australia. And the reason we came over to Australia is because of my wife. She had an opportunity, a job opportunity out here. And she asked me, Andy, do you want to come to Australia with me? And originally I said, no. I was actually quite settled in my life in the UK at the time. I had 2 cats at a house, and the British wrestling scene was starting to thrive a little bit, so there was always opportunities to go back. But my wife said to me that apparently was the wrong answer. I needed to rethink it, and she made me go away and come back with the correct answer, which was yes. And then we came over to Australia, and oh my God, I'm so glad I came to Australia. For both of us, our careers, our real life careers, our shoot careers, so to speak, have been very good to us. We've got some wonderful friends. Frankly, the craft beer here, which I'm absolutely obsessed with, is rather marvelous. And Melbourne brunch. Oh my God, Melbourne brunches are the best thing in the world. But I think also for me, when we're talking about the wrestling, I got into the Melbourne wrestling scene and through MCW when it was originally ran by Tommy Hellfire and Mikey J. And for me, the reason I got back into wrestling and the reason I got involved in the Victorian wrestling scene was because, as somebody who's from outside the country, you're looking for opportunities to meet people. You sort of got no history in the country, and it was just a way to try and meet new people. And thankfully Mikey J had various videos of stuff that I had done in the United Kingdom, and when I told him the shows had been on, he went, oh yeah, I've heard your work. So I was able to come on board MCW some, I think, like I say, 7 odd years ago now. And so yeah, it's been a really good time. But that's why we came to Australia. It was actually primarily for my wife's job, but for us, I think it was just to really open up a new chapter in our respective lives, go on a bit of an adventure, experience Australia and some of the countries around Australia as well. The original plan was to come for 2 years. We've now been here for 10 years, so we did fail the plan a little bit, but we are loving Australia. It's been very good to us.
No plans on going back to the UK?
Look, there's always an inkling. There's always an inkling, and mainly because, and I'm sure if you speak to a lot of people from other countries who are living in Australia, it's usually the same reasons. Your family, basically. I think thankfully to technology, I can always talk to my parents, I can talk to my brother and his family, but it's not quite the same as physically being there and growing up with them. And I think if anything's ever going to bring me and my wife back to the country, it may be something to do with, say, touch wood, our parents' health, for example, or if there's some sort of family urgency that suddenly comes up. But apart from that, I can't see any reason to come back to the United Kingdom, especially when you've been here for 10 years. You've kind of grown apart from your old friends a little bit, and you've obviously formed your new friends over here. But look, when you live in 2 different countries, I think everyone has this. There's things that you're always going to miss. I mean, if I go back to the UK, there's going to be things I miss about Australia. That's the curse. It's
Yep.
a kind of, but obviously the good outweighs the bad. But look, ideally, we don't want to go back to the UK. But you never know. You can't say never, ultimately.
I imagine the last couple of years have made that distance thing a little bit extra difficult as well.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, ironically, my parents should be here right now to be visiting, but sadly, due to COVID over in the United Kingdom, which is, it's a very stressful story over the UK and the risk of travel. I think my parents very sadly have knocked that idea on the head. And also my in-laws as well. They were going to come over. And they've made this a very similar decision. And that's really hard. Look, I mean, I could moan about how I've been feeling about it all, but I think we've all been in a very similar boat. I mean, if you want to talk about what's happening in wrestling at the moment, I think one thing that's been really hard is that people had plans. I had plans, and other people in wrestling had plans, whether it was going to be running shows or potential opportunities overseas and, things like that. And we've all been living in a limbo, and I think that's really hard. And what's even harder is, we had that moment where shows were happening and then they paused. Like, I know recently in Victoria, for example, MCW have had to postpone Fight to Survive like multiple times now, and DMDU have just had to postpone a show as well. And I think that's what's really hard on everyone, is the stop-start of how our lives are going at the moment.
Yep.
I think the one blessing I've got, though, so I've got a 2-year-old daughter at the moment. So at least for me, if we're suddenly in lockdown, or if, there's no shows going on, at least I have my daughter to sort of, keep me busy, watching her grow into this young little ragamuffin. I'm trying to be very polite about it. She's a right cheeky little character, and that keeps me sane. But I also know several people in wrestling who I worked with who either live on their own or they live with housemates, and they're just waiting for their various wrestling projects to keep moving forward, and it's very frustrating. I imagine there's been some frustrations for yourself as well. Like you probably wanted to do features on shows or on certain wrestlers, and then something happens, and it's just like, well, that can't happen. And it's been hard for all of us, harder for some than others, but it's been hard on all of us.
Yeah, I think like in that first 6 months where we thought it was only going to be a short period, and then it's just gone on and on. It's just got harder and harder as the time's gone on. So hopefully now we're moving out the other side.
I do think that initial period was the hardest the most. I know I won't say any promotion names, but I do know there was like 2 fairly big promotions in Victoria that won't be running any more shows purely because of those early months. It was just too long for them. They just decided, that's it, we're done. And, that's a real shame to the industry. But, I think COVID, or the pandemic and the lockdown, I think has been a bit of a mixed blessing. I think it's been hard for all of us, but at the same time, I think it's given everyone an opportunity to take a bit of a rest for themselves. I think it's been an opportunity for people to take a step back, have a little bit of a rethink. We also had obviously the standing up, the hashtag that was going around as well, and it's just given us all an opportunity to rethink about what we do within the business and the people and the promotions that we associate with. And I think, look, I think we're already coming out of it stronger, but I do also believe that by the end of it all, I do think the Aussie scene is going to come out a lot stronger than it did going in. There's going to be speed bumps, undoubtedly, but I do think in the long run the Aussie scene is going to be a lot stronger for it.
Yep. And then on to yourself, when did you sort of first discover that passion for wrestling?
Oh man, I remember, look, when I was a kid growing up, although I didn't particularly watch any wrestling during the 80s periods or the early 90s, I remember going around to my best friend's house, and his brother was a big wrestling nut. And I just remember looking at the cover of his VHS tapes, and you're just seeing these characters larger than life, your Hulk Hogan's, your Ultimate Warriors, your Sergeant Slaughters. But I started probably watching it around about 96. My parents got a hold of a satellite dish. We got Sky Sports, which in the UK was your main source of WWF wrestling. And the first Mania that I watched was WrestleMania 12. So the main event was Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels in the Iron Man match. And at that time, young, naive Andy still 70% believed wrestling was real, and watching that match with that sort of lens and the fact that I hadn't been watching wrestling for years and knew what was coming half the time, was a great experience. Because in an Iron Man match, right, most falls in an hour, and you've got Bret Hart and he's got Shawn Michaels in the headlock, and Shawn Michaels quickly rolls him up, and I stand up and say, oh, 1, 2, oh no, he didn't get it. really, that emotional journey of watching that match, really brought home to me the excitement of it all. And obviously, just like all of us, like when we're told Santa isn't real, you start to click, yeah, wrestling isn't real, but you begin to understand that it's this, fictional, it's enjoyment and things like that. And obviously, just before that time, then you move into the Attitude Era. So it was like just pre-Attitude Era that I got into it. And so I got into it just before it properly exploded in popularity in America and in the United Kingdom. So that's exactly when I got into it.
Yeah, that's an incredible match to be one of the early memories and an incredible time to become a wrestling fan, I guess.
Oh, I was going to say that show, weirdly, that show did not have a lot of matches on. Well, I suppose not weirdly. I mean, the main event was an hour long, but it didn't have a lot of matches on it. But you had Stone Cold Steve Austin, an early Stone Cold Steve Austin, taking on Savio Vega. You had, trying to remember, you had Roddy Piper taking on Goldust when Goldust was at his peak best. In a Hollywood backlot brawl. Can't remember what and Diesel versus The Undertaker, which sure wasn't like a 5-star work rate match or anything, but at the time when you're a wide-eyed kid and everything, and you're just watching these two massive 7-footers pounding the crap out of each other, that stuff is absolutely magic. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're following the story, you're involved in the hype, you still believe, and that's pretty special stuff to watch.
And with that early passion, was commentary always the path that you thought would be a way for you to go, or was the aspirations to get in the ring?
No, the aspirations were to get in the ring. I think a lot of us, get involved in wrestling, imagining one day we're going to win the Royal Rumble and, win the WWF Championship and Mania. But I actually started wrestling training at around about 1999. So, I got involved, just before the millennium. And I started training down at the Sobel Leisure Centre. It was for a promotion in the UK called FWA. No relation to the New South Wales FWA, I might add. But it was for their training school. And I actually was training with them during my year out before I went over to university. So those were my first tastes of sort of wrestling. And yeah, I hoped to become a wrestler. And I think if you were to ask people back then, or even ask some of the people who were active in the British scene who may have trained with me at that very early age, I'd like to think that I wasn't a spectacular wrestler, but I would have been quite safe, I feel. I was quite technically minded. But the problem I always had was, unfortunately, I had a bit of a ticking time bomb in the form that sadly I had a hip condition called Peeves, which is basically an accelerated arthritis of one of my hips. So the sad reality is I was always going to have a limited lifespan as a wrestler, whether at that age I cared to admit it or not. I did get to wrestle after training. I did get to wrestle for about 4 or 5 years for a series of the smaller promotions. But I think one thing that's always really important to do, and I think this is something that a lot of people who train in wrestling and actually in any assets of life should keep in mind, is that, look, we all have a dream and there's always certain things we definitely want to do. But I think it's always important to keep your eye out for all those other opportunities. And for myself, when I was training in my very first year of wrestling, keeping in mind I was planning to go to university in another city in the country, I got picked up as a referee. I sort of volunteered to become a referee for a London-based promotion. And the reason I became a referee was because A, it gave me the opportunity to be a referee in matches with some excellent wrestlers. And keeping in mind at the time, the British team was starting to fly over international. So, I got to be in the ring as a referee alongside the likes of, Jerry Lynn, Christopher Daniels, the biggest name undoubtedly being Eddie Guerrero. And as somebody who wanted to learn how to be a wrestler, being that far away from some of the best wrestlers in the world and seeing how they communicate, seeing how they work their matches, phenomenal education. I would recommend any wrestling trainee, if they can, get that opportunity to be a referee, because you're the front row to learn so much from some incredibly experienced and talented people. So I got the referee gig, and it just meant that this wrestling promotion was effectively paying me to travel down to London, see my friends, and then I'd go back to university. And then from there, the opportunity to be a commentator for that promotion came up as well. So in many ways, I fell into the commentary gig because it was all about keeping your eye out for these various opportunities, and you never know where that road's going to take you. Unfortunately for me, wrestling was not a road that physically wrestling, competing in the ring is not a road that I could go down. Unfortunately, my physical disabilities, as mild as they were, to most eyes, unfortunately meant that I couldn't be a wrestler in the ring. But at least it gave me 4 years of being an in-ring competitor where, I could take enough from it that it adds a bit of legitimacy to my commentary, just a little bit of experience, and it helps me out. And obviously I found my niche as a commentator, both in the UK and also here in Australia. So it always helps. But I know this wasn't necessarily the question, but like I say, I think anyone in wrestling, trainee or a young wrestler, always keep your ears open, your eyes open to opportunities, even if it doesn't necessarily take you down the road you think it's going to take you, because you'll be amazed at what you can learn by taking those other opportunities.
Well, I guess as an added benefit, commentary has a much longer lifespan as a career.
I often feel like, funnily enough, I told some friends recently that another passion of mine at one time was acting. And I said to them, look, I'm never going to be one of these tall, young, good-looking lads in a drama, but I'm always going to be a great, grumpy old bastard. So now that I'm approaching 40, I'm a peak grumpy bastard right now, or I'm at the early ages of being a real grumpy bastard. And it's similarly to commentary. I present myself as an English lord. I'm a well-spoken English commentator. I'm a play-by-play guy, which, to be honest, I was probably a bit young for, but I'm just hitting that ripe age right now. So yeah, you're right. It does give you that advantage. But in many ways, whether it's like acting or anything else, I think in wrestling, it's all about playing to your strengths when it comes to sort of your age and where you are in life as well. I'm sure if we look at any in-ring competitor, there's always an advantage. Look, if you're an old grizzled veteran, you can present yourself in a certain way that you couldn't present yourself as if you're someone who's young and new and going into it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Commentary has a sort of a longer lifespan. So there's one way of looking at it. But I also think it's sort of playing to your advantages, whether it's your age and, dare I say, demographic as well.
Did you feel that you had like the broadcast chops when you got into the commentary side of things, or was it all sort of quickly learning on the fly as you went by?
Interesting question. I mean, I'd say yes, but then again, I imagine there's a lot of people out there who think that they naturally go into commentary, and in reality, they don't, if that makes sense. So having that confidence is something. Yeah, I had that confidence that I could do it, but I guess until you do it, you don't really know. But I had some experience within the wrestling scene. I had experience with being an in-ring competitor. I had some drama experience as well. So there was definitely the building blocks to allow me to go into it. I will say this though, is that I listen to some of my earlier commentary now, and it makes me cringe because I probably knew what I was doing. Well, I probably felt I knew what I was doing back then, but now I realize, oh no, I'd still had quite a lot of way to go. But now I can look back on it and go, well, that's good because I improved in this area and this area and this area. And over the years, and actually particularly in Australia, I've had the opportunity to commentate with a wide variety of different people and different styles. And I think you begin to realize just how much you mature and improve as a commentator or as a performer. So, looking back on it, the answer was probably wasn't really ready, but I had the confidence that I was ready. So yeah, sometimes you've just got to throw yourself in the deep end and figure it out as you go along.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of any creative field. People look back on their early work and go, "Oh, that's not great," but it led to where they are now. So
My earlier work, I was positioned as some weird American quasi heel color guy, and to be honest, Color's not my area. I may say the odd surreal thing on commentary, but generally speaking, I'm a play-by-play guy. I love stories. I love telling stories. I think that is personally my strength. When a guy's walking down to the ring and explaining why is he here, you know, who is he facing, what is his motivations, I think that's my strength ultimately, and trying to put a bit of emotion into that story. And I think, look, like an in-ring competitor, same with a commentator, you got to figure out, well, what makes me tick? What is my strength? You know, is it about, you know, drawing attention to the narrative, or is it drawing attention to the emotion? I think I'm more of a very narrative-driven individual myself.
And growing up on that sort of attitude era WWF, was Jim Ross like a big influence?
I would imagine if you were to ask any commentator, they would say Jim Ross was a leading influence. And how can he not be? The guy was fantastic at what he did. He was a narrative driven commentator, but he had a lot of passion. And, you know, you remember, you know, there's times where him and Jerry Lawler are talking about the narrative of the story, but then half an hour later into the show, you've got, you know, Jim Ross screaming, Austin, 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 as he's like giving everyone stunners and everything. That he knew when to, you know, get more excited. He knew when to take it to that next level. Jim Ross was incredible, just because there were layers to his commentary. You know, he'd start off the show with a slightly excited tone, then he knew when to calm it down, he knew when to build it up, and then he knew when to go over the top when Stone Cold or The Rock came on screen. The guy made it an absolute art form. And, you know, I think, look, I think any commentator will say that Jim Ross is a major influence. I can't think of any other commentator, and there's some amazing commentators in the history of wrestling, obviously. I can't think of any other commentator that has probably been as influential as him.
Okay. And then sort of since coming to Australia, you've worked with Melbourne City Wrestling,
Yeah.
most recently Deathmatch Down Under, and then you've also just been announced as a member of the Renegades of Wrestling commentary team.
Yeah. I think that's going to be a really fun promotion. When they approached me, they told me, so I had just left MCW, and I think one of the hardest things about leaving MCW is that I'd be leaving the commentary table, and I'd be leaving Lindsay Howarth, who me and him have great chemistry. You know, we've been working for several years together. So when I found out that Renegades of Wrestling were putting me and him back together again, I was like, oh, there we go. You know, that's like, it's we didn't even take any time off. And Julian James is joining us as well. And, you know, I know Julian outside. I haven't commentated with him. I've worked with him. He's been a very charismatic sort of manager at MCW when he was doing the Helter Skelter gimmick. And obviously we've seen him do a lot of ring announcing and also his own interesting version of commentary at the Wrestle Rock shows. I think it's going to be a good tandem, mainly because, look, at MCW we had myself, Lindsay Howarth, and Crackerjack. And Crackerjack was also that very charismatic, outspoken individual. He was a hell of a character, very much like you know, Julian as well. So I think it's going to be a really good three-man team, and I'm really looking forward to it.
How does it feel to have such an important role in the Australian wrestling scene?
I mean, it feels great. And look, it's always really nice when, you know, it's nice to be in an important position, and it does come with a little bit of a double edge to it, I suppose. It depends on the promoter. But, you know, when I was working at MCW during the previous era where we also had Mikey J and Chris Fresh as part of the management team as well. And Chris Fresh, good friend of mine, but he wore his feelings on his sleeves. And if you got a story point wrong, or if you said something incorrect, he could be real grumpy about it, but for all the right reasons. He was very positive in that way, because he was one of the main sort of storytellers of the promotion. He was the main booker, and, you know, he wanted every detail to be correct. But then conversely, if you got it right and you were given credit for it, and he went, thank you very much for getting that point across, you know, that's a great feeling to have. And this is it. I'm a narrator, effectively. I'm a storyteller, and that's what I enjoy most about it. It's more about, look, you can put on a show and you've got random guy A versus random guy B. But I think the advantage of having fans who follow your promotion is that these random wrestlers, they're more fleshed out than that. And if you've got people who are following it on video, you know, they're so much more than that. They're characters that you relate to. They're characters who you despise because of their history. And it's on us to kind of recap that history and recap the psychology of why someone is in this war with this other person. Why is somebody in this story of someone? You know, and it's what I enjoy. I enjoy getting stuck into it. And I think one thing that makes a really good commentator is having your own interpretation of what's happening. And the great thing about having a three-man team like previously in MCW with myself, Lindsay, and Crackerjack, there may be times where all three of us had a very slightly different interpretation of the story that was going on, whether that was unintentional or by design. You know, it might be that I think Adam Brooks is the hero of the story, and it might be that Lindsay goes, no, Slex is the hero of the story, and Crackerjack might just go, you're both talking bollocks, they're both horrible people, you know. But it's interesting, and I think we have moved on from the point where wrestling is black and white and wrestling, and even to a degree, heels and faces. It is a little more complicated than that. And you know what? I think we're all sick and tired of certain times when WWE can insult our intelligence or deliver something that maybe is a bit oversimplistic. I think people generally enjoy complicated stories. I think people generally enjoy having a story that they can follow and to interpret who their individual hero or villain is. I think that's what it makes it best.
And I imagine that's sort of where the commentary becomes so important, to give all those different viewpoints and sides of a story.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, on the one hand, you know, by default, myself and Lindsay and the commentators are, we're faces, but you know, you're trying to explain the motivations of a heel. Look, you know, I think it's a bit of a cliche now to say this, but they often say that the best comic book villains are the ones where the reasons why they're doing what they're doing is sort of anchored by a noble cause, if that makes sense. And you know, many heels are like that as well. You know, and that's what makes a good villain. Like there is a point to what they're trying to make, or they believe that they are right, and you need to try and cover that as well in commentary.
Are there any pet peeves for you when you're watching wrestling and there's certain things on commentary that come up, or tips that you have for people to improve commentary?
Do you know what? This is going to be very unpopular. I was watching the Daniel Bryan versus Hangman Adam Page, the second one that they had on AEW, which, for the record, was a brilliant match. There were two things that bugged me. I'm trying to remember what the two were, but the first one was in the first match, in the very first match that they had, Daniel Bryan grabbed Adam Page by both wrists around the ring post, and he drove his head hard into the ring post, and Adam Page was cut right open. And as a result, Adam Page was trying to fight from underneath for that entire match. Then in their rematch, it was actually the other way around. Adam Page caught Daniel Bryan, cracked his skull open, and Daniel Bryan was fighting up from underneath. And it was a little thing. And to be honest, there's probably times I would have missed something like this, but no commentator picked up on that. No commentator picked up on, hey, that's what happened in the previous match, but now it's the other way around. And I felt that that was a missed opportunity. Also, the second one I remember now, it's a real niggly thing, but it's when Daniel Bryan hit Adam Page with a Gotch style pile driver. But the reason it annoyed me is because they called it a Gotch style pile driver. But Jerry Lynn was one of the judges. So if Jerry Lynn is one of the judges and his finisher is a cradle pile driver and Daniel Bryan's hit a cradle pile driver, you call it a cradle pile driver and you highlight the fact that Jerry Lynn is one of the judges. So look, it's one of those little things and there's going to be times where on commentary, I've missed little storylines like that. But I also know that as a commentator, my job is to go to the wrestlers. My job is to go to the promoter. And I'll tell you one thing, DMDU is brilliant for this. The guys behind it are big fans of long-term in-ring storytelling, and they will tell me till they're blue in the face, make sure you get this across in commentary. But it's important to ask the wrestlers and the promoters to get these little things. You know, why are they doing certain things in a match? Particularly when there's long-term storytelling over multiple shows going on. That's my biggest pet peeve, when something like that gets missed, because it's important to the story of the match. And if you miss it, you miss it, and you've missed a really crucial component of that match.
Yeah, and if you highlight those minor intricacies of the story, it can really elevate it to that next level.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think there's more than just the story. Like, there's the story that sets up the match, but then there's the story of what's going in the match. And, you know, you need to concentrate on the stuff that's going in the match as well. Yeah, I mean, I was going to whittle off some examples, but I'll go down an entire tangent if I do that. But like I say, there are the two stories. Yes, there's the story that set up the match, but then you've got to talk about what's going on in the match. I know we're used to, we have spot fest matches, so to speak, and they always have their place in wrestling. But when you've got a match where there's an actual story going on in the contest, you need to be on top of it. You need to be talking about what is happening in the match. You know, whether it's something as simple as he's a high flyer and his knee is injured. You know, even if it's that simple, or if it's something a bit more complicated than that, you know, you need to be telling that story, because you're aiding the narrative of the match for those watching at home.
And then on the sort of technical aspects, before a show, what sort of preparation goes into getting ready to call a match or a show?
No, I mean, it's a good question. Look, first of all, it sort of depends on the show and the match. Like, some matches and some shows are more important than others, you know, particularly when we were at MCW or a DMDU show. You know, some of these matches have history, so to speak, and these wrestlers have history. So usually the preparation actually happens the days leading up to a show. I will usually spend a couple of evenings double checking my notes. Tell you one thing, I'm very thankful for the people who made cagematch.net, because that helps fill out a lot of blanks. You know, it's like, has this guy faced this other guy before? How many championships has he won? How long have they been wrestling for? You know, these are the sort of details that you want. You're trying to identify, what are the differences between wrestler A and wrestler B? Who's bigger? Who's got more championships? Who's got a better win-loss record? Who's more experienced? Who's traveled more? You know, those are sort of things that help sort of, like, you know, massage your commentary. They sort of help, you know, give out those sort of initial details. You know, the hardest part of commentary is usually when they're walking to the ring and the earlier moments of the matches, because you're trying to give some background information, who's in the ring. So there's a lot of prep in regards to that. But then when you're at the shows as well, you know, talking to the wrestlers, saying, hey, are there any psychology points you're trying to get across? What are you trying to accomplish with the match, and things like that. And in fact, I got a really nice compliment from a DMDU wrestler, Mike Chaos, and he's very early in his career, but I just pull him to side like I do anyone. I just go, hey man, I don't know a lot about you. I know you've not been wrestling long, but can you tell me a little bit about your character and what the motivations are? And, you know, he was really thankful for that, because he had an opportunity. He's obviously very passionate about his character, like a lot of wrestlers are. So he told me about what the motivation of the character is. And then in the commentary for his match, I was able to put that across, talk about his motivations, what was important to him. Because believe it or not, you know, most wrestlers aren't necessarily about, me win matches, me win championships. You know, characters are more complicated than that. People have motivations beyond the most basic drives. And if you can understand that, it just helps you contextualize what you're saying on commentary.
And then I guess, yeah, if you have 15, 20 minutes in a match, you have a lot more time to convey those motivations and that story behind the character than they do in a 90-second to 2-minute promo.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, commentary is a really good opportunity just to kind of build on a storyline, and even sort of give a bit of context as to what may happen in the future. For example, you know, there are times where, particularly with DMDU do a lot of forward thinking with the booking of their matches. So, you know, there'll be times where I'm talking about something on commentary because they've told me in 3 or 6 shows time, this is going to happen to this wrestler, or this is going to occur. And so I can allude to certain things that will eventually happen down the road. And I that's what I really like, the opportunity just to drop in those little Easter eggs, so that when they finally do happen, you kind of go, that made sense. I see what they were doing now. And, you know, that's where you find the fun in commentary.
Okay. And then Do you take a different approach depending on the promotion? So, like for an MCW show versus a DMDU show, or the upcoming Renegade shows?
I'll be honest, look, DMDU, MCW, Renegades will probably have a very similar approach, just purely because those are my main promotions, so to speak. I've obviously worked for smaller promotions, and because I don't necessarily, it might be that that promotion hasn't got a long history, for example, or it might be that that promotion, I'm not too familiar with it. So there's only so much prep work that you can do. Obviously, preparing for, say, an MCW show is a lot easier because there's just so much history. There's so much that I can pull from. Being that I was with MCW for 7 odd years, there's a huge amount of history on the cagematch.net. There's Wikipedia articles. There's a lot of stuff. In fact, with MCW shows, I had to be careful not to over prepare because there's just so much information out there. And sometimes you've got to decide, I'm going to talk about this, but not this, because I could waffle for bloody hours, about something. DMDU, a younger promotion, so there isn't quite as much history to dig into. Though obviously each competitor has their own history as well that I can dig into. But like I say, DMDU are very hands-on when it comes to this is what the long-term plan is of something, and that helps me because it obviously allows me to allude to certain things I was mentioning earlier. With Renegades, look, I imagine the presentation is going to be very similar to the old school MCW, purely because obviously it's being run by 2 of the old promoters, so I imagine there's going to be some familiarities there. But saying that, they've also told me that there's a lot of things they're going to do different. I don't know what those things are yet. I'm very excited for Renegades mainly because they're keeping so many of their cards close to their chest, and I know they're doing that because they want to protect some of the big ideas that they've got. So I won't really know until they tell me, really.
Okay. Do you feel that that sort of element of preparation is something that's kind of overlooked by fans and people watching the shows?
Do you know what? Yes. And not just with commentary. I think one of my biggest pet peeves in wrestling can be that, look, obviously wrestlers are sort of revered and respected, and rightfully so, because the athleticism and the time and the energy and the training they've put into their craft. Absolutely. I think one thing that can frustrate me is I believe sometimes people can think that anyone can be a referee, or anyone can be a commentator, or anyone can be a ring announcer. And then what happens is that someone will promote a show, they'll get in some incredible wrestlers, and then they'll just give their mate Bob an opportunity as a ring announcer, and then Bob, shits a bucket. Or they'll give their mate an opportunity as a referee, and then you realize, oh, actually, there's more to it. So yeah, I do think that sometimes people may underestimate the time, energy, and effort that goes into these things. You can probably tell from what I'm saying now is that I take a lot of pride in what I do. I generally believe, I'm probably one of the better commentators in the country at the moment. Maybe that makes me cocky, but I don't know. But then again, I've been doing it for 20 odd years. I think I have a right to hold that opinion. And yeah, I don't think you can just stick anyone behind the microphone. I mean, I guess you can, but it depends on the quality that you want. It depends on the experience that you want. And I guess in some ways, look, it depends on the promotion. If you want a promotion where you want to be put forward as, one of the best, and like you want an informative commentator, that's fine. But also if you want one that's a bit more, I suppose, rugged and a bit rough around the edges, you can afford to have a commentator that's a bit like that as well. So I suppose there's always opportunities for different styles of commentators. But yeah, I do think some people can think that anyone can do it. And I think that's where a challenge is for people in these sort of support roles in wrestling, trying to justify their own existence within the business sometimes.
Yeah, and I think if the commentator has that passion, it really comes through and it elevates the show. So it's definitely
Oh
important to
yeah,
have
no.
that.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. Look, the quality of my work can vary massively depending on my level of passion on that day, and how I'm feeling about that product at that time. Definitely. And I do think the best commentators are the ones who show passion over being technically good, if that makes sense. One of the previous commentary partners I had, and I know that I'll say his name and he's going to send me a message on Facebook. And anyway, but Travis Houston, who was one of my first co-commentators at MCW, the one thing I loved about working with him is he was this very strong Australian accented, sort of excited kid on commentary versus this very analytical British guy on commentary. And it just worked beautifully. But the reason he was so good was because of his passion. You know, I'll be talking about, oh, this guy is coming down and this is his motivation. And he'll just be screaming, yeah, he's a scoundrel. He's an arsehole. I hate him. You know, he's just talking about his raw passion as to why he dislikes this guy. And I think that that is something that's really hard to capture sometimes. That raw passion as to why you hate or love someone.
And then obviously because you've been doing it for so long, you've had the privilege of calling some matches with some of the greatest talents around at the moment. People like AJ Styles, CM Punk, Samoa Joe, and then the big MCW one, Kazuchika Okada. How surreal were those moments?
Oh, I'll tell you one thing. I think the Kazuchika Okada moment was for me, whoa. Mainly because right, I can say Kazuchika Okada in my sleep now, but at the time I was like trying to get his name right constantly. I think if you watch back the match where he's coming to the ring, you can see me constantly looking at the name card going, don't this up, don't this up, you know, make sure you get it right. And I think if you listen back to it, I do accidentally pronounce it wrong, slightly incorrectly at the end. But that was one of the few moments I had, honest to God, goosebumps up and down my arm. The enormity of having the longest reigning IWGP heavyweight champion of the world, you know, coming into our small little building compared to, you know, Tokyo and stuff like that, you know, was just a really magical moment. It was great for everybody. And, you know, got to ring announce him, got to commentate on that match. I think that match did a lot of favors for his opponent that night, Slex as well, who really took a massive step up and is probably one of the best, if not the best wrestler in Australia today now, in my opinion. You know, that was a truly magical match. But yeah, obviously there's other people who have got to commentate on, but the Okada one, you know, beats them all, frankly. Just a truly amazing moment for everybody. And it was just amazing that, you know, everything, just all the moons are lined up just perfectly for that one moment to happen. And it happened. And it was a stunning moment.
And with Renegades sort of looking to become a big national promotion, there might be opportunities for other big matches. Is there a dream match that you would like to call?
Oh, do you know what? You know, it's interesting you ask. I think Renegades, I don't 100% know what their strategy is. There's obviously two ways they can go about it. You know, one of those ways is to try and bring in some internationals, perhaps a little bit like World Series Wrestling, or, you know, maybe they'll purely focus on home talent. I don't know. I think one thing that would be a really great opportunity for any promotion, but also our own, is to actually bring back, even if it's obviously for a mini tour or for a one-off, to bring back some of the Australian wrestlers who have made a name for themselves abroad. Look, don't get me wrong, I'd love them to bring over abroad guys like Kenny Omega and stuff like that, or, you know, anyone from AEW, for example. But you know what? I think we would all love to see Jonah Rock, or Jonah now, you know, come back to Australia so that we can cheer our asses off for him. I'm sure we'd love to see, you know, he's obviously with WWE at the moment. If Elliot Sexton were to come back, I think that would be awesome. Buddy Murphy, who wouldn't want to see Buddy Murphy again? I think, look, I think now is the first time in Australian wrestling history where we've had guys who have gone over to America, and whether it's through NXT or WWE, they've made a bigger name for themselves, and to come back and fuck it, give them a hero's welcome. Why the hell not?
Yeah, like we could do a massive show with just bringing Aussies back home.
Oh God!
Guys
Tell you
and
one
girls.
thing: the one dream. Although I've left the promotion, I think the one dream match, if this doesn't happen, it'll be a real crying shame. Buddy Murphy versus Adam Brooks for the MCW Championship. That has to be the money match in Victoria at the moment. If they could somehow pull that off, that would be absolutely incredible. But personally, just because I've always been a massive fan of his, and, you know, he is a friend and someone who I've always admired, I would love to see Jonah come over and do a tour over here. Everybody loves Jonah. Jonah's the man. I want Jonah to come back, and I want him to have matches with a couple of the rookies, revisit some of his famous feuds, stuff like that. And I just want to see him drop a load of dudes on their heads. I don't think that's too much to ask for. That would be amazing if Jonah could come back.
Yeah, and Jonas a lovely fella too. I think between him and Robbie, they were two
Oh,
of the earliest people that allowed me to do interviews. So big ups to those guys.
I was going to say, yeah, Robbie gave me a golden opportunity to interview him when I was previously doing my Snapmares thing. And, you know, what a gentleman. Absolutely. You know, a guy who's had so much incredible success, but you know what? He loves the Australian scene and always willing to give a supporting hand. I mean, you know, what absolute legends within this scene.
Wonderful. Finally, where's the best place for people to support you and track this creative journey moving forward?
Well, I've got my main one is going to be my Facebook, Lord Andy Coyne on Facebook. I'm sure if you search Lord Andy Coyne, it will come up somewhere. I do have a Twitter, which do you know what? I've had Twitter for like well over 12 years, I think, but it's only within the last year and a bit that I've started to use it properly. So you can follow me on there as well. I have an Instagram, though, to be honest, it's mostly just me talking about and posting up photos of beers that I'm drinking. So not so much wrestling content on there. But look, if you want to talk about wrestling or if you want to connect with me, Twitter, Facebook, Lord Andy Coyne. Yeah, I'm on there somewhere.
Is there Lord Andy Coyne merch on the Wrestler merch website or any other merch places?
I have been I don't have any merch at the moment. Thank you for asking. It is something I'm considering. I always have ideas for it, but at the same time, there's always a little part of me that feels guilty trying to take merch space off the tables from the wrestlers themselves. But watch this space. I'm thinking of throwing something up there at the moment. I'm just not sure what it is yet, but something will come along one day.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for your time and good luck with everything. And hopefully Renegades can kick off soon and I can get down to Melbourne again.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, thanks very much for your interview. Really appreciate it. Good luck with Pario. It sounds like you've had a really promising hard start. I know everyone's behind you to hopefully make it the best it can be. And look, I've tried launching something similar. I know it's a lot of hard work. So, you know, good on you, man. Please keep covering the Aussie scene.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.